I made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment, and I don't expect to be forgiven. I'm simply here to apologize.
So I got quite a bit of criticism in my last video for the scoring system that I used to create some of my graphs, both from people who were quite constructive in their feedback, as well as some people who were just kind of crashing out in the comments. I initially had an explanation for my scoring system in the video, but the video got too long and I ended up deleting it. After rewatching it, I can definitely see how it looks like I pulled these numbers completely out of my ass, when in reality, I only half pulled these numbers out of my ass. So I thought I'd make this follow-up video giving a detailed explanation at how I arrived at the scoring system, as well as offered some alternative graphs for people who are unhappy. Before I get into it though, I just wanted to say to please not take these videos too seriously. These videos are almost solely for fun and because I'm a huge nerd who enjoys analyzing data. In fact, I currently work a full-time as a data scientist, and I saw the data on climbing history, so I thought, why not make some graphs? Even with a theoretically perfect scoring system, which obviously we don't have here, there's still gonna be many reasons why this may not be a completely accurate assessment of the world's best climbers, but I do think it can provide some insight, and I also just think it's kind of cool to visualize data, at least for me. So yeah, I really appreciate the constructive criticism, but there's no need to crash out in the comment section. So the main issue people had with the video is me placing 1 point for a V13 flash, 5 points for V14, and 18 points for a V15 flash. Here's how I got to this point. In my experience, flashing or climbing a certain grade is considerably more difficult than flashing or sending a previous grade. As just an example, I flashed tons of V7s on the tension board before ever flashing a V8, and flashed tons of V8s before I ever flashed a V9. A linear scale doesn't make sense to me because, for example, if we assign the point system as 1, 2, 3, this would indicate that flashing a V14 is twice as difficult as flashing a V13, but then flashing a V15 is less than twice as difficult as flashing a V14, which doesn't make sense to me. So an exponential scale makes a lot more sense to me, where each next grade is a certain times more unlikely or more difficult to flash than the previous grade. If we set this number to be 2, the scoring system should be 1, 2, 4. If we set this number to 4, the scoring system should be 1, 4, 16. As of today, there have been 201 V13 flashes, 36 V14 flashes, and 6 V15 flashes. Using this as our sample size, V13 is almost 6 times as likely to be flashed than a V14, and V14 is exactly 6 times as likely to be flashed than a V15. Based on my experience, when I originally devised my video, the chances that I flash a V7 are around 5 times as likely as flashing a V8, and flashing a V8 is around 5 times as likely as me flashing a V9. This is pretty unscientific, but it's just based off of my own experiences, and the fact that the data even skews more heavily towards the difficulty of flashing harder grades gives me at least a little bit of confidence. So because of this, I originally had my scoring system as 1, 5, 25 for a V13, V14, and V15 flash, respectively. But even for me, 25 points for a V15 flash felt a bit too extreme, especially given the fact that, like, say, Foundation's Edge is supposedly quite soft for V15. So I arbitrarily decreased this to 18. In hindsight, saying 1, 5, 18 out loud with no context seems completely asinine, and is probably why so many people took issue with my video. But I hope this makes more sense. I had a lot of comments saying how I purposely manufactured this to look a certain way, or maybe I asked AI and for some reason it spit out 1, 5, 18. By the way, doesn't make any sense. Like, AI would probably tell you 1, 2, 3 or like 1, 5, 10. But truth be told, I genuinely wanted to find somewhat of an accurate representation of how good people are flashing boulders, but I just did a horrible job of explaining this system. Also, not that this matters in the slightest, but outside of climbing, I have an engineering degree as well as a computer science degree, both of which I graduated at the very top of my class in the honors college of my university. Now, am I still a dumbass? 100%. I do dumb shit on a daily basis, and if I'm being stupid, please let me know. But some of these comments are acting as if I typed in one sentence into ChatGPT for the first time and then made a video out of it, which is, completely not true. Now, I'd like to offer some alternative scoring systems, some of which were suggested by you guys. As I stated before, if I attempt to be somewhat objective and use the number of flashes as a metric to determine the scoring system, I end up getting an even more insane graph than the one in my video. So like, as I said before, according to climbing history, there have been 201 V13 flashes, 36 V14, and 6 V15. Using this as a metric, we can say that flashing a V14 is around 5.583 times as difficult as flashing a V13, and flashing a V15 is 33.5 times as unlikely as flashing a V13. Setting V13 equal to 1 point would mean V14 equals 5.583 points, and V15 is equal to a whopping 33.5 points, which, as I stated earlier, would give an even more insane picture to the situation. No. Wait. This commenter also suggested that I maybe put this graph on a logarithmic scale. I think I know what he's trying to get at because the scoring system is exponential, but I think this is misguided because the ability to get scores is fundamentally additive. I'm trying to find the absolute difference between these climbers and not the ratios between them. But just in case you want to see what it looks like, here is this same plot on a log graph. And you can see, even though Adam is still an outlier, now visually speaking, going from 1 point to 4 points looks around the same as going from 36 points to 190 points, which I don't think paints a very accurate picture of what's going on. Now, I will admit, intuitively speaking, having a V15 equal to 33.5 points does feel like it is overvaluing it. So if we want to go the other direction and try to be very conservative on the upper grades, set the exponential system equal to, say, 1 to 4, we get the following plot, which honestly looks quite similar to my original graph. Adam Ondra is still a little bit less of an outlier, but he's still definitely quite a large outlier. And again, this is using a system where I'm pretty confident undervalues how difficult hard flashes are. Again, as an example, it is much easier for me to flash 2 different V8s than it is for me to flash 1 V9. Regardless, this is probably the scoring system that I should have used in my previous video, just because it somewhat makes intuitive sense and doesn't seem as outlandish as the one that I used. I had a really strong climber named Sergio comment on my video saying that there is a general equation to derive a climb's difficulty, which he said average of climbing sections in V grade plus 4 divided by 2, which indicates that the difference between a flash of a V13 and a V15 should be twice as much. I'm not sure where this formula comes from. I tried asking in the comments, but he hasn't responded yet. So Sergio, if you're watching this video, please let me know what I'm missing. But it doesn't really make sense to me to have V15 worth only twice as much as V13 when the number of V13 flashes is 34 times the amount of V15 flashes. But just to see what it looks like, if we give 1 point for a V13 flash, 1.25 points for a V14 flash, and 2 points for a V15 flash, we get the following graph. Even if we make V13, V14, and V15 all worth 1 point, which I think everyone can agree is heavily biased against the higher grades, the climbers' placements on the graph is still quite similar, with obviously less space between the top flashers, especially for Ondra, who by far has the most V14 flashes and by far the most V15 flashes. In fact, there's legitimately no point allocation that I can make that makes any amount of sense, where Ondra's not a clear favorite in the ability to flash hard boulders. Same thing with sport onsites, and same thing with red point ascents. By the way, if you think any of my graphs look kinda sus, I encourage you to cross-check my results with those found on climbing history, especially these specially curated lists where I got all of my data from. If you find any mistakes, let me know in the comments and I will pin a comment with all the corrections. The bouldering graph is a bit more interesting. If we use 124 instead of 1518, Elias falls a few spots, but the top boulderers are still pretty similar. If we equate V16, V17, and V18 as all 1 point, then Sean Rabitou becomes the best boulderer. But again, I think this point system makes even less sense than the one that I originally used. Another thing that I wanted to address is the x-axis on these charts. They don't mean anything. These are 1D scatter plots. I had somebody in the comments say that not having an x-axis was, quote, absolutely unhinged. Oh my god. Personally, I don't think it's that deep. Graphs are just tools used to visualize data. They don't need a specific number of axes. You can have 1, 2, 3, 4, or even more axes if you need. The reason why the climbers are still spread out along the x-axis is because if I put them all on a single line, the graph would look absolutely horrible. And as many people pointed out, I was trying to do like kind of a parody of Jimmy High Roller, who is a basketball YouTuber, and he uses these 1D scatter plots all the time. The last thing I'd like to address is the people who were angry about the competition climbers chart. The chart in itself is actually not arbitrary at all. It simply lists out the people with the most gold medals within both the World Cup Series and the World Championships for boulder, lead, and combined. Where I think I went a little bit wrong is that it doesn't necessarily indicate who the greatest of all time is, although I do think it gives a pretty good argument for it. As I stated in the video, Serrato's skill set and overall ability is definitely the best we've ever seen in competition climbing, but I really don't think it's fair to call him the greatest of all time yet, since he just does not have the time in the sport to have the accolades and the legacy that, say, Jakob Schubert has. There is a difference between being the best in a particular sport at a given moment and being the greatest of all time. Yes, it is impossible to compare the current competition landscape to the older one, but modern day comp climbers have way more tools at their disposal to become a better comp climber compared to the older generation as well. As an example outside of climbing, Michael Jordan is still considered by many people to be the greatest of all time in basketball, even though the saturation of high-level talent in the NBA is clearly quite a bit larger today than when he played. Some people still think Babe Ruth is the GOAT in baseball, despite playing against plumbers who were on a diet of like only beers and hot dogs. Yanya dominating her chart while still being active also shows it's not impossible to win loads of gold medals in the modern system, and I have no doubt that if Serrato stays healthy throughout his career, he will one day be at the top or near the top of this chart. And when that happens, he will probably go down as the greatest male comp climber of all time. There are other metrics that one could use to determine who the greatest of all time is, but for the purposes of this video, I will say that this graph simply shows the total number of World Cup Series and World Championship gold medals for all disciplines. Except speed, of course. We don't talk about speed. Alright, well, so I hope that cleared up some things that people had issues with in my previous video, and hopefully there's no more crash outs in the comment section. If I missed anything, or if you think that all the approaches that I took in this video are still completely wrong, please let me know, and I will try my best to respond to all of them.